Imagine your life, your very existence, legally dissolving. Your body, your possessions, your earnings, your children, even your own name no longer yours. They are absorbed as a droplet into the ocean, into the identity of another. This was not a Gothic novel's plot. This was the legal and social reality for millions of women in the 19th century. Upon uttering two simple words, "I do," welcome, tonight, we descend from the romanticized portraits of ballroom proposals and lavish weddings into the shadowed corridors of the 19th century home. We are not here to speak of Jane Austen's witty courtships alone, but to hear the whispers behind the drawing room doors, to read the despair in diaries locked away, to understand the profound, often terrifying truth that for a woman, marriage was less a union and more an annexation. Our story begins not with a person, but with a legal doctrine, a ghost that haunted every woman from cradle to grave, the doctrine of coverture. Under English common law, which heavily influenced American and other Western legal systems, a single woman, a femme soul, had a limited but distinct legal personality. She could own property, sign contracts, sue and be sued. But upon marriage, she underwent a civil death. She became a femme covert, a woman covered, veiled by her husband. The brilliant and acerbic 18th century jurist Sir William Blackstone laid it out with chilling clarity. By marriage, the husband and wife are one person in law. That is, the very being or legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage, or at least is incorporated and consolidated into that of the husband. Let us translate this elegant legalese into brutal daily life, property and earnings. Everything a woman brought into the marriage, her dowry, any inheritance, the clothes on her back, instantly became her husband's absolute property. He could sell it, gamble it away, or bestow it upon a mistress, with no legal requirement to even inform his wife. Any wages she might earn, should she be of a class forced to work, were his. If she worked as a seamstress or a teacher, her paycheck was legally his to collect and spend as he saw fit. She could not open a bank account. She could not buy a loaf of bread on credit. The body and its autonomy. The law saw the wife's body as part of the husband's domain. The concept of marital rape was a legal impossibility. A husband had a conjugal right to his wife's person, which she was legally and morally bound to fulfill. Denial was not only a social scandal, but grounds for him to sue for restoration of conjugal rights. Her body was not her own fortress. It was his annexed territory. The children. A mother had no legal rights to her children. They were the husband's property. In the event of a separation, divorce being almost unattainable, he could, and often did, take the children away, place them with relatives or even strangers, and forbid the mother from ever seeing them again. This was a weapon of supreme psychological torture, used relentlessly to keep dissatisfied wives in line. No legal recourse. A married woman could not sue in her own name. She could not testify in court against her husband. If he beat her, her only hope was that neighbors might intervene, or that a magistrate might vaguely caution him for disturbing the peace. The law offered her no shield. This was the iron framework of the gilded cage. But law is one thing, lived experience is another. Let us now step into the cage itself. For middle and upper class women, marriage promised social status and financial security. The reality was a life of managed dependency. Her world shrank to the domestic sphere, a realm romanticized as her natural kingdom. In truth, it was a realm of endless labor and profound isolation. Her day was a meticulous tapestry of management, directing servants, if she had them, planning meals, overseeing the household accounts, though the money was not hers, and ensuring every surface gleamed to reflect her husband's status. Her worth was measured in the smoothness of his home life. Intellectual pursuits were frivolous. Serious study was deemed unnatural, a danger to her delicate constitution and reproductive health. But the true engine of this system was the cult of true womanhood, a pervasive ideology that defined the ideal wife by 4 cardinal virtues: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Piety placed her moral salvation in the church and prayer. Purity was an obsessive focus on chastity, the absolute requirement of virginity before marriage and fidelity after. But it was submissiveness that was the keystone. She was to be passive, yielding, obedient to her husband as to God. Her will was to be seamlessly subsumed into his. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord, was quoted not as spiritual guidance, but as domestic law, and domesticity made the home her only valid battlefield, the nursery her throne room. Her identity became relational. She was John's wife, Henry's mother. Her own name, her own dreams, faded like ink in the sun. For the poor and working class woman, the cage had even fewer gildings. She might work a brutal factory shift, then return home to all the domestic labor, cooking, cleaning, child-rearing, without help. Her earnings went to her husband, who might drink them away. Her body, exhausted by labor and relentless childbirth, had no respite. The doctrine of coverture ensured her double burden was legally enforced. Now we must confront the darkest corners. What happened when the marriage became a prison, not just of law, but of cruelty? Domestic violence was endemic, normalized as chastisement. The phrase rule of thumb is apocryphally said to originate from an old legal judgment that a man could beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb. While the specific law is debated, the sentiment was ingrained. Police were loath to interfere in private family matters. A wife's recourse was silence, or in extreme cases, the rare and humiliating application for a peace bond. But what if she wanted out? Here, we face the starkest inequality of all. For a man, divorce, where it was legal, as in England after the 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act, was relatively straightforward. He needed to prove one thing: his wife's adultery. A single act of infidelity was enough to sever the bond and cast her out, ruined. For a woman seeking divorce, the bar was impossibly high. She had to prove not just adultery, but aggravated adultery. Adultery plus another egregious offense. This could be incest, bigamy, cruelty, or desertion. She had to prove a pattern of savage beatings, or that he had abandoned her for years, and that he had been unfaithful. The cost was prohibitive. The process, a public spectacle that guaranteed social annihilation. For most women, legal divorce was a phantom. So they separated. But a separation without a divorce left a woman in legal limbo. She was still a femme covert, but without a husband's support. If she managed to live apart, any property she acquired could still be claimed by him. If she dared to enter a new relationship, she was guilty of adultery, and he could sue her lover for criminal conversation. A lawsuit treating her as damaged property. But within this darkness, flickers of light persisted. Women were not silent victims. They were strategists, rebels, and pioneers. Some used the only tools they had. The pen. Caroline Norton, a brilliant London socialite and writer, was trapped in a famously abusive marriage. When her husband, George, took her 3 young sons away to Scotland, denying her all access, she did not sink into quiet despair. She launched a one-woman political campaign. She wrote passionate pamphlets, a letter to the Queen, and English laws for women in the 19th century, detailing her personal agony to illustrate a systemic injustice. Her relentless lobbying was instrumental in the passage of the Infant Custody Act of 1839, which gave mothers, if they were of good character, the right to petition for access to their young children. It was a crack in the monolith. In the United States, the fight was woven into broader movements. The Married Women's Property Acts, passed state by state from 1839 onwards, began the slow process of dismantling coverture. The first, in Mississippi, protected a wife's property from her husband's creditors. Later acts grew more robust. These were not gifts from enlightened lawmakers. They were hard-won concessions, pushed for by early feminists who argued that a woman with no control over her property could not be a responsible moral or economic actor. The abolitionist and women's rights movements were deeply intertwined. Women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, organizing the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, saw the parallels between the chattel status of enslaved people and the civil death of married women. Their revolutionary Declaration of Sentiments directly parodied the Declaration of Independence. He has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even to the wages she earns. As the 19th century bled into the 20th, the legal architecture of the gilded cage began, brick by brick, to be dismantled, but its shadow is long. The social and psychological echoes of coverture reverberate in our world today. The expectation that a woman will take her husband's name, a direct symbolic remnant of her legal absorption, the persistent motherhood penalty in wages versus a fatherhood bonus, the lingering suspicion of a mother who leaves her children versus the praised father who merely babysits. The historical weight behind the fight for bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. These are the ghosts of the 19th century marriage, haunting our modern debates. The story of the 19th century wife is not a simple tale of oppression. It is a complex narrative of survival within an oppressive system. It is the story of women who navigated, negotiated, and sometimes shattered the confines of their world with remarkable ingenuity and courage. They wrote novels that critiqued the system from within. They used the rhetoric of morality and motherhood to claim a public voice. They formed friendships and networks that provided emotional and sometimes financial sustenance. When we look back at their portraits, the stern faces, the corseted silhouettes, we must see beyond the stillness. We must hear the silent scream of legal non-existence, but also the quiet, determined scratch of a pen drafting a law, the whispered conspiracy between sisters, the unbreakable love of a mother for children she could not legally own. Their fight was for personhood, to be seen in the eyes of the law and society as a femme soul once more a person entire of themselves. A fight in many ways that continues. Their world was a gilded cage, but they were not just the canaries within it. They were the ones who, against all odds, began to file at the bars.